In this video, we're going to take a look at creating a custom HelixGPT agent using Innovation Studio. In this example, we're going to create a GitHub agent for HelixGPT. We're going to start by creating a new application in Innovation Studio for the supporting processes for this agent. In Innovation Studio, click New, create an application, name the application, give it a short name, and a group ID. Click Create. Next, we're going to create the webhooks that are associated with this process. In Innovation Studio, go to the Administration tab, go to Integrations, and go to Web APIs. We're going to use the GitHub documentation to create a new Web API. So we got the host name as api.github.com, we have the port, and we have the protocol. We're going to select custom for the authentication. We're now going to add the authentication for the token-based authentication, which is authorization, and then the bearer token. And next we need to go and generate that token. Going into GitHub, going to Settings, and then going to Developer Settings. We can go to Personal Access Tokens, and we can create a new token. Now we're going to want to give it the scope of the repo so that way it can read and write from the repo. You're going to want to copy that token, and this is what we're going to put into the bearer value. Now that we have the API connections created, we can then go and create the API endpoints in Innovation Studio. Within our application, we're going to create a new document. This document defines the schema for the API call into GitHub when we go to create a new request. Looking at the GitHub documentation, we can see that we need to pass it a body and a title in order to create a new issue. So go ahead and define that as a JSON within the document schema and save the document. Back in our GitHub agent, we're going to go to the Web APIs tab, and we're going to click New. We're going to create a new API named GitHub. We're going to create two API endpoints, a get issue and a create issue. We get the method and the path from the GitHub documentation. And for the create issue, we're going to define the body, which is that document that we created in the previous step. Now that we have our APIs created, we can create the processes associated with them. The first process we're going to create is the get issues process. We're going to go and create a new process within our application. We're going to name it get issues, and we're going to use the web request module in order to make the web request to GitHub. Once we've added the web request module, we can add variables. So we're going to have an output variable, which will be what the HelixGPT process gets in return. And we're going to define the connection. So GitHub and then the API, and we're going to select the get issues API. So that's all you need to do to be able to get the information from GitHub. So this is going to do a call to GitHub, and it's going to return the issues that are available. Really easy to make an API call as part of your agent tooling. The next one's going to be a little bit more complicated because we're going to pass it information. We're going to create a new process called create issues. Now we get to define our variables. So the first variable we're going to define is the body, which is an input variable. We're going to mark it as required. We're going to define the title variable, which is also going to be an input variable marked as required. We're going to create a third variable called request. This is the body that we're going to build to pass into the API call. And then we're going to have the output variable, much like we had in the previous step, which is going to be how GPT handles the request. Once that's done, we're going to add the web request, and we're going to look up and find the document process. This is what's going to build that request that we're going to pass into the API call, connect them together. And now we're going to define that create document. We're going to select the input map. We're going to select that create issue request. And now we're going to map the fields. So we're going to select body and title. And we're going to create the build an expression. We're going to define title to title. We're going to define body to body. And when this runs, it's going to map those fields. It's going to create that JSON, and it's going to pass that in as the body for the request field. So we're going to output that as the request. We're going to output the output. Now on the web request, we're going to specify the API information. And then for the document, we're going to specify the request, which is what we built in the previous module. And then for the output variable, we're going to select the output. So this will go through, dynamically build that body, pass it to the API call, and then send that off to GitHub to create the issue. So the last thing we have to do is map the API calls to these connections in the administrative panel of Innovation Studio. So go back to administration, go to integrations, go to web APIs, go to web API mapping, select your application, and then select your connection, and then select your connection configuration, which is GitHub as well, and save it. So now there's a linkage between the GitHub connection, web API, and the application that we created. Now let's go test the application to make sure our API connections work. So go back to your application, go to processes, click manage process, select one of your processes and click run. For the get issues process, we don't have an input, so we can click run, and then we can see that it ran successfully, and we can see the list of issues was returned in the details tab. For the create issue test, we need to pass in a variable. So we're going to pass in a title and a body that we're going to use to create the test issue. And when we run it, we should see it run successfully. And if we return over to GitHub, we should refresh the page and see that the test issue was created successfully. Next, we return to HelixGPT Manager to create the agent and the tooling needed to call these IS processes. Go to GPT Manager, launch deployed application, and we're going to create a new skill. So we're going to call the skill GitHub agent, and we're going to define the provider, the model, and then we're going to tell it that the instruction type is agent. Going to the Tools tab, we're going to define the two tools that are needed, one for getting the issues and one for creating the issues. The Create GitHub Issues tool is a tool type of IS process. We give it the description. This is important. This is used by the tool to define how we're going to use it. And then we're going to give it the configuration. This is a standard JSON that tells us how to call that process name within IS. We don't have any inputs in this case, so we just define it as the process name. And then in the Create GitHub Issues, again, an IS process tool, we give it the description. In the description, I'm going to tell it that it must be passed a title and a body. And then we give it the configuration, again, the process name. And then in this one, we're going to define the input variables. So the title and the body. And we're going to tell them that they are required fields in the description for those two. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the agent configuration. Navigating to the Agents tab, we're going to create a new agent called GitHub Agent. This is going to define how we're going to use those tools. Within the agent, we're going to define the name. We're going to define it as a type of a React agent. We're going to give it a description. We're going to select the tools, including Knowledge Retriever tool and the two GitHub tools that we just created. And then we're going to give it the instruction set. Within the instruction set, we're going to tell it how to use the tools. So we're saying using the GitHub issue tool to retrieve the current GitHub issues, using the Create GitHub Issues tool to create issues on the request, asking the body and title of the issue, which is the description of the issue. Finally, let's return to the Skills tab, associate the skill with this agent, and let's go ahead and test the agent. We're going to select the skill, we're going to select the Agent tab, we're going to check the GitHub agent that we just created, we're going to click Apply. Now if we click Test up in the corner, we can test this agent right from within the tool. Let's start by asking it to list the current GitHub issues. Since there's no current open issues in my environment, it asks if I would like to create one. If I say yes and give it a description and a title for a new issue, it will go out there and create the issue for me. You can see that it returns the information that was requested, as well as a link back to GitHub automatically. So we can check to see if that issue was created. And now if I ask it to list my issues, it will list the ones that have been returned, including the new one that we just created. So with very limited knowledge of the third-party endpoints that we were trying to connect to and very limited developer skills, I was able to come in here and create a custom agent that allows me to interact with GitHub using HelixGPT.